Good afternoon, everyone. This is Mike Romalic here with the Hurricane Season 2020 update, part of the Hurricane Outlook and session for July 23rd, 2020, recorded around 2:21 p.m. Eastern Time. Well, taking a look here at Major Hurricane Douglas, maximum sustained winds of 120 miles per hour, pressure down to 967 millibars. This is expected to become close to a Category 4 hurricane with maximum sustained winds between 125 to 130 miles per hour. Maybe some additional strengthening in the short-term realm. In the long-term realm, this is expected to enter cooler waters here over the next several days. This could get pretty close or right over the islands of Hawaii here and could pose a direct threat to the islands over the next several days or so. If we take a look here at what's going on in the visible satellite, again, you can see a fairly well-rounded central dense overcast here with a clear eye out here. This is fairly indicative that we have a fairly well-organized structure. There is some dry air and more stable air out towards the west of the system. However, you notice that there is some pretty good banding off towards the northwest, and that's kind of rotating around with time. We also have kind of this banding over here on the southwestern quadrant. Now, Hurricane Hunter recon planes will begin operations Saturday morning, very early, probably around 6 or so in the morning on Saturday into Hurricane Douglas. So that will be one thing to watch. But in the short-term realm, we do have some dry air over towards the west that has been trying to work in from time to time. But this is a fairly well-organized system and is not really expected to weaken much. But over the next few days, this will enter cooler and cooler waters over there, about 25 to 26 Celsius, and get pretty close to Hawaii as a hurricane or a strong tropical storm. So residents and visitors in Hawaii need to be paying attention to the local Weather Service Office forecasts and forecasts from the National Hurricane Center. Now, taking a look here at Tropical Storm Gonzales, maximum sustained winds have decreased a little today to 60 miles per hour, and the pressure has risen to 1,000 millibars. This is still expected to become a hurricane, and tropical storm or hurricane watches and warnings additionally will be added likely later this evening, either at 5 or 11 o'clock this evening, more than likely. Again, what's going on right now is that this is encountering some weaker or some more dry air and weaker low-level convergence. But over the next few days, this could intensify again into a hurricane rather for Gonzalo. And what's going to end up happening is this will pass probably to the south of Barbados. This is staying on a relatively low track at about 9.5 to 10 degrees north latitude here, and this could get pretty close to St. Lucia or to St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and as such, a hurricane watch has been issued for there. A hurricane watch has also been issued for Barbados, and we could see additional watches and warnings issued for Trinidad and Tobago later this evening or during the day tomorrow, as this could get fairly close to there, eventually crossing into the Caribbean here and beginning to undergo a weakening trend to the south of the Dominican Republic and Hispaniola and to the south and east of Jamaica, which is right here. Now, on the IR satellite presentation, we have seen a couple of things happen today. This is from about 2:05 p.m. Eastern Time, so just a little bit behind. But you notice what we have going on. We have a fairly small but robust deep convective burst that has been persisting over since this morning. We have seen this convective burst wax and wane a little bit, but we have seen fairly substantial deep convection forming to the south and now almost just near the center of circulation. If we take a look here at the visible satellite from tropicaltidbits.com, a couple of things to note here. First of all, we had a fairly big convective area over here that has now since collapsed and weakening, and you can see that arc cloud outflow boundary kind of racing off towards the west. You also notice, if we jump back to earlier this morning, where you can see that exposed low-level center, this is from a couple of hours ago, we had a partially exposed low-level center, which was right here, and you notice how during the afternoon, with this recent convective surge, we have seen that begin to push further to the north. And this has allowed some of the convection to the south begin to kind of re-enter into the center of circulation area. This should help to at least maintain this center of circulation, and at least in the short term should provide a stabling out, kind of a flatlining, if you will, in the weakening trend. Now, this may weaken to 50, to 55 or 50 miles per hour in the short term. However, this convective burst rotating, or not rotating, but pushing into the center is a fairly good indicator, that we do still have some southwesterly shear being impinged on the system. If we go back to the IR satellite loop, you notice how that's kind of a lopsided convective blob right there, and that's fairly indicative that we still have some southwesterly shear. That's also imparting a lot of dry air. You notice that the northern part of this system is fairly dry, convectively anemic. However, if you go back to the visible satellite, again, if this center can be fully engulfed by this convective burst, it will at least have some potential to reinitiate some strengthening and build back what inner core was lost. And we look here, this is the 15Z 850 millibar vorticity product from the Central University of Wisconsin-Madison site here. And what you're really seeing is you're seeing this kind of overall, it's a little stretched out through here, but your energy and vorticity is pretty well consolidated in through this area. And this is going to be tracking, this is just south of 10 north latitude here. And this is going to be heading over towards the south and moving ever so slightly like this over the next few days or so, and this still has 2 to 3 days before it reaches the island chain over here. If you take a look here at the water temperatures across this area, the sea surface temperatures are fairly warm across Barbados and the Lesser Antilles, the Windwards, Trinidad, Tobago, Grenada, St. Lucia, the Grenadines. Those areas are under fairly warm sea surface temperatures and the upper ocean heat content values. If you look here, the reds and the greens, yellows, and reds are fairly indicative of that high upper ocean heat content values. And where our system is going to be heading into is a pocket of fairly high upper ocean heat content values that is going to help the system just a little bit. And, excuse me, if you take a look here at the 12Z model guidance here, this is the 12Z guidance for Tropical Storm Gonzalo. The model guidance has come down a little bit, but this overall is still forecasting this to be a hurricane by the next about 24 hours or so. So by tomorrow afternoon, we will likely see this become a hurricane if current trends do continue. And if this inner core can rebuild some, this will have a shot at becoming a hurricane. And once again, that's why we do have hurricane watches currently for Barbados, St. Lucia, and the Grenadine Islands. That is why we do have a hurricane watch in effect. And again, this is moving just a tad bit south, and we did get a viewer question about why that is. And why that is because we still have a fairly, the system is fairly well being dragged almost by this convective burst down here. And you notice in the couple minutes that we did this, we got a new update. Still a fairly large convective burst that's occurring, fairly cold tops here. That's fairly indicative that we're going to have this stick around even through the diurnal minimum, which is the area in the relative minimum of convection. And you notice here, and we kind of popped that up here, 18 to 1815 now, we can notice even further that this low-level center is now becoming at least partially now covered in this convection. And that's very important because that convection, you might imagine, without any convection, if it's just a exposed low-level center, this center is eventually going to decay itself with time. There's no convection to continue the surface flux process and the latent heat releases and drive the lower pressures because the atmosphere is pretty well balanced at that point. But right now, what we're seeing is this convective burst try to get into the center of Gonzalo, and if it does so, that's going to continue the latent heat release process, going to continue the process of being able to have surface fluxes, and that's going to help to once again initiate some reorganization of what inner core was left. And again, this is going to be riding more off towards the west-northwest here over the next few days or so. But again, most of the model guidance today is suggesting that this will be coming in a little bit to the south. And the reason for that, as I alluded to, is because the stronger models, the stronger the system is, the further north it's going to want to be pulled. A stronger system always wants to get pulled further north. Conversely, a weaker system is going to feel a lot of these trades and be pushed more further to the south. So that's why even saying for Trinidad and Tobago that your guys are not out of the question foreseeing impacts as of right now. Everyone that's either in the hurricane watch or slightly to the north or south of that area, Trinidad, Tobago, Grenada, Barbados, St. Lucia, the Grenadines, those areas are going to want to watch the progress of Gonzalo over the next few days or so. If you take a look here at the GFS forecast, this is the 12Z run for the next 6 hours. This is basically valid as of about 31 minutes ago, or this is roughly about 2 o'clock Eastern time. And if we move out here, and the model's a little bit delayed, there we go. If we move out here to about 3 to 6 a.m. tomorrow morning, we notice that we have a fairly interesting complexion here of scenarios going on. First of all, you notice these stronger trades to the north and also the dry air. This is that big Saharan air push that we've been talking about. But notice how these trades are not as they are down here. And this is fairly important because if the system can move just a tad bit off towards the north and west here, it is going to be likely disrupted and completely torn apart because the storm is so fragile. It's not a strong enough system to be able to hold its own against a lot of these stronger trades and drier air through here. And you notice that we have trade winds about 15 to 20 to 25 knots blowing across this area. This would impart some shear across the area as well as all of this dry air. You also notice what's happening. We do have some southwesterly shear being imparted on the system. That's helping to induce some of this drier southwestern air to be brought in to the convective core of this. And if you notice, eventually here, this is about 48 hours from now on about 12Z Saturday. This is about 7 o'clock in the morning on Saturday. This is approaching the island chain here, and Barbados is sitting right about here is Barbados, and that's the islands right there. Trinidad and Tobago's right here, and you notice 992 on the pressure field, a little bit more area to work with in terms of the moisture, but look what's happening. This is becoming a lot more stretched out because notice the trade winds through here are a lot greater, blowing about 15 knots or so of trade winds, and as such, by the next about 60 hours, as it's passing over the islands, not only does it interact with land, but also dry air to the north, and then it eventually gets some wraparound moisture that is dry from the continent of South Africa, or not South Africa, from South America rather. So the progress of the system is very interesting, needless to say, as to what will happen. If we take a look here at the 850 millibar vorticity, we still have a fairly high indication that this is still fairly robust, and it's not wanting to completely die out here. You notice that this is a fairly circular, rounded appearance in the model field, and this has a fairly robust low-level center all the way basically into the Caribbean, eventually dying off to the southeast of the Dominican Republic and Hispaniola over here after the next 102 hours or so. Conversely, if you take a look here at the European forecast model, what's fairly interesting is the progression of the system. You notice that's now, and that was basically the model field about on 0Z. This is the 0Z model field, and that's the 12Z model field. So it's initialized a little bit better and more to the south, and this actually strengthens the system. You notice how it goes from where it is right now. It tries to tighten that low-level center up a little bit. You notice yet another tropical wave coming through here, and that tries to get going. So the tropics are becoming more active, but specifically focusing on Gonzalo, this does seem to be initializing a little bit better on the European forecast model and not completely killing it like it was. If you notice back here, how this was just an open wave on the 0Z model run, now it's actually a system, and a rather robust system, making it in at least a little bit into the Caribbean before succumbing to that stronger trade wind. Now, if you take a look here at Tropical Depression 8, this is now maximum sustained winds of 35 miles per hour with the pressure down to 1,008 millibars. Again, this is still expected to become a tropical storm over the next 24 to 36 hours or so. The next name on the list would be Hannah. This is now expected to be coming in at about 50 miles per hour. And what's expected to happen, rather, is slowing down a little bit. If you look here, this is actually This is the 24-hour forecast point right here, and then this is expected to really begin to intensify even further past then to about 45 to 50 miles per hour right before landfall. And as such, a tropical storm watch has been issued for Texas, the Texas coastline from near McAllen, Texas, all the way through near Houston, Texas. Eventually, this will move inland and weaken. Now, the biggest concern that I have right now for this area is going to be some heavy rainfall, isolated storm surge, maybe a couple of tornadoes in those rain bands, heavy rain, flooding, coastal problems like that. If we take a look here at the visible satellite, though, this tells a little bit of an interesting picture today. We have a little bit better of an organized system during the day today. Persistent deep convection by these colder cloud tops, these overshooting tops, indicative of the stronger thunderstorms that are kind of driving in. Now, we still have some drier air, some continental air being mixed in from time to time to the north of the system. That's kind of working its way in from time to time. A fairly broad structure. You notice this is a fairly broad overall structure in the wind field, but we have seen some consolidation today in the recon plane that was in there from earlier. Is fairly indicative that we do have the system kind of moving off towards the south and west here. You notice the pressure from 1009 to 1008 moving off towards the south and west here, so fairly interesting. But what's happening is that this is actually just a broader area. We're waiting to see when a center can fully become under some deep convection. Right now, the center is kind of in an area to the east and also to the west of any significant convective bursts, as we have a fairly consolidated area right there. This will likely be the area for another center reformation out here, but you notice the wind barbs in through here, about 30 to 34 knots of wind through here on the southern and southeastern base leg of the flight here. So that is fairly interesting to note that the recon has validated the winds of about 35 miles per hour. So if you use the standard 90% reduction there, that's a good 30 to 35 knots in across this region. So that's something to watch here over the next few days or so. If we take a look here at the 12Z Gfs forecast for Tropical Depression 8 over the next few days or so, you notice what ends up happening. We go out here, it's about 24 hours. The pressure is not really falling much down to 1,005 millibars. This is the Texas coastline right here. So this is approaching the Texas coastline by tomorrow morning, rather. So it's moving a little bit quicker, but you notice a fairly broad envelope of energy, but we do have fairly significant moisture in this area. And you notice as we go on throughout the next several days or so, what ends up happening, the system now starts to slow down on approach to the Texas coastline. We talked about this, how now it's going to be starting to slow down, and by late tomorrow night, pressure's down to 1,009 millibars under a fairly well-developed, what is presumably a central dense overcast, a fairly well-enveloped energy moisture through here. And the model deepens it down to near hurricane intensity by the time it gets to the Texas coastline here. Now, there's a couple things to note. The HWRF model, the HWRF model, the hurricane forecast model, is known to explode these invests. This is, well, not necessarily an invest, but these weaker systems to be bigger than what it is. So I would use this as caution, but if you live anywhere along the Texas coastline, again, what we talked about from near McAllen, Texas to near Houston, you need to start undergoing your preparations for what you would do during a hurricane. Again, because we're seeing some of the model trends today that indicate a stronger system moving into the area. And we want to emphasize this hard enough that, again, you have to be ready. Just because the official forecast does show 50 miles per hour doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be exactly 50 miles per hour. It could be stronger or it could be weaker, just like with Gonzalo. So the main takeaway here is by the HWRF model, this is stronger and strengthening on approach into the Texas coastline here. On this particular model would be near hurricane intensity, or strong tropical storm to low-end category 1 strength. This would end up producing some storm surge, some heavy rainfall, flooding, tornadoes, the whole 9 yards there. So the biggest takeaway today is that if you live near McAllen all the way up through Houston, now's the time where you need to start taking your hurricane preparedness precautions. We talked about this morning, so if you do want to see this morning's video, I will put it into the cards, the eyes in the sky in the top right corner, for you guys to go watch. If you live in that area, I went over more detail in that particular area later, or earlier this morning rather. If you take a look here at the HMON, this is pretty much the same thing. The HMON model is strengthening this even further down to 991, continues to intensify it on approach. This would be obviously a formidable hurricane at this point. Now the HMON is the old GFDL. It has its high bias, of course, with trying to intensify cyclones beyond reasonable suspicion. So I suspect that 978 millibars isn't probably going to be that pressure, because it just doesn't have a lot of time. That's 42 hours from now, and with the way that we're seeing this today play out, this does not favor rapid intensification at this point in time. However, it is interesting to note, however, that the GFS forecast model is rather unenthusiastic about the system, with only one closed lopsided isobar here with a lot of dry stable air. So it's a mix-up game, but right now we expect this to become a strong or a modest tropical storm on approach into the Texas coastlines here, probably somewhere to the south of Houston here and north of McAllen. But anywhere from near McAllen through Houston needs to be monitoring the progress of Tropical Depression 8, as tropical storm watches have been issued for that area. One more thing I think I should point out here is that over the next 5 days, we do have another area to watch in the main development region of the Atlantic Basin. A strong tropical wave coming off of Africa is expected to gain some organization out here to the west of the Cabo Verde Islands, and has a 20% chance over the next 5 days, as highlighted by the National Hurricane Center at their 2 p.m. tropical weather outlook. So this is the wave that we've kind of been talking about for some higher land impact potential. So we do have something to watch here over the next 5 days or so beyond Tropical Depression 8 and Gonzales. So a lot to watch here over the next 5 days. Again, I'll be back with another video forecast update tomorrow morning. Of course, if anything significant happens, I'll be back with one later tonight, but I don't really expect anything significant to happen with either system, so the next update will probably be tomorrow morning around 9-ish in the morning, 9 p.m. or 9 a.m. Eastern time or so. But of course, I will be posting constant updates here on Twitter at MikeRomali1. Go follow me. Links will be down in the description down below. All right. Hope you all have a great rest of your afternoon and evening. I am Mike Romali, and I'll see you guys back here then tomorrow afternoon, or tomorrow morning rather. Stay safe.